everyone, welcome back to Dietitians and Nutrition Support. Today we're going to be talking through our very first parenteral nutrition case study for a patient who's going to be put on a custom 2-in-1 parenteral nutrition with a lipid piggyback, and they're also on propofol. Lots of things to consider today as we start this calculation, so let's get to it. Today's patient is Mr. M, a 38-year-old male that comes in at 5'8" and 150 pounds. His BMI is normal, and he's been admitted to the hospital for a motor vehicle accident. He's been in the ICU for a total of 1 day so far and has no nutrition support at this time. He has no major past medical history or past surgical history that's going to play any part in our guidelines for today. Based on his current admittance to the ICU after this motor vehicle accident, we're seeing that Mr. M is presenting with small bowel perforations and will likely need some kind of surgical resection within the next few days or week. Based on the fact that he'll likely have some kind of a gut-based surgery in the next few days, and the fact that he doesn't have full gut integrity at this point in time, it would likely be unsafe to enterally feed Mr. M. If we were to enterally feed Mr. M, we could potentially put him at risk for having some kind of sepsis or infection or damage to the GI tract tissues without full gut integrity. So we're going to make a parenteral nutrition recommendation for him today based on a 24-hour recommendation. Looking at Mr. M's current status, like we've said, he's been in the ICU for 1 day. He's currently on propofol, which is a lipid-containing sedative. This means that there will be calories associated with the amount of propofol provided to this patient. We'll come into those calculations a little bit more later, but it's important to note that he's currently receiving propofol at 10 milliliters per hour at this time. Mr. M's current energy needs are between 1700 and 1800 kcals, which is based on the rough estimate of 25 to 26.5 kcals per kilogram. This will certainly change based on the status of your own actual patient, but for the sake of this, we're going to use that as our estimated energy needs at this time. Mr. M's estimated protein needs are about 100 grams, which is about 1.5 grams per kilo of protein. Again, this is going to be based on your individual patient, but for Mr. M, this is what we're going to use to calculate his protein intake today. Additionally, we're going to assume that Mr. M has no micronutrient deficiencies. So remember that not all parenteral nutrition is created equally. There are standardized bags, there are custom bags, and there are different kinds of both of those as well. Today we're going to practice calculating a custom 2-in-1 bag that includes a lipid piggyback. This means that we'll be using our custom approach to get the 2-in-1 solution, meaning both protein and carbohydrates in one solution. And we'll also have the lipid piggyback, which will be additional lipid provisions that are not included in the same solution as the protein and carbohydrates. So let's work through calculating each of these macronutrients out so we know exactly what's going to go into our solution. To start our calculations of macronutrients, I typically begin with protein, or in this case, we'll actually see it in the form of amino acids. If you consider the fact that parenteral nutrition will be going directly into the bloodstream, we need to consider how they're administered as opposed to what an enteral formula or even an oral diet would look like. Can you give whole proteins straight into the bloodstream? Not really, because if we consider what happens in the gut or in the digestive tract, we're really seeing that there's going to be some kind of digestion or breakdown of the whole proteins that a person will consume, and when they're transported into the body, they're typically in dipeptides or sometimes tripeptides, and mostly as free amino acids. This means that it's going to be most safe for us to provide protein in the form of amino acids within this intravenous solution. Coming back to our protein needs, we're talking today about a recommendation for 100 grams of protein. When we're considering protein, even though it's going to be in amino acid form as opposed to in a whole protein form, we can still say that the protein will equal approximately 4 kcals per gram, meaning that to provide 100 grams of protein to our patient, that's going to take up 400 of our kcals that we're going to be providing from protein. As this is just one of 3 of the macronutrients we need, it's important for us to see how many non-protein kcals we will be providing to our individual. If we want to stay on the low side of our calories today, just for estimation's sake, and for this particular calculation, we're going to stay at 1,700 kcals. And if we have 1,700 kcals as our goal, and we subtract out the 400 kcals from protein, that's going to leave us with 1,300 total kcals that are not from protein, so non-protein kcals. This means that we can use this 1,300 kcals in the remainder of our 2 macronutrients, and we're still providing our goal of 100 grams of protein to this patient. Looking next at carbohydrates for our second macronutrient, we're actually going to see carbohydrates provided in the form of dextrose. Dextrose is a very similar compound, form of glucose that is utilized very quickly by the body to help provide that carbohydrate to the system. And while we typically consider carbohydrates that are consumed orally or through enteral nutrition to provide 4 kcals per gram, you'll actually see that dextrose is going to be 3.4 kcals per gram. So a little bit different when we're doing all of our math calculations. While we still have 1,300 of our kcals left to provide to this individual, we have to split that between our carbohydrate provisions and our lipid provisions. So it can be an appropriate estimate for individuals who are not diabetic to do about 70% of the non-protein calories from carbohydrates and leave the remainder from fat. So if we look at 1,300 kcals and we times it by 0.7, that'll put us at about 910 kcals that can come from carbohydrates. To find out how many grams of carbohydrate that might be, we can take our 910 kcals and then we can divide it by the 3.4 kcals per gram that we see from dextrose, which will give us approximately 267.6 grams of carb. Or if we want to round that, we can take that to 268 grams of carb. And if we do all the math backwards again to see the grams times the 3.4 kcals per gram, you'll see that that actually gives us a total of 911 kcals coming from carbohydrate. After we've taken into account the carbohydrate that we're providing, we can say that of our 1,300 non-protein kcals, and we minus our 911 kcals, that's going to lead us to about 390 remaining kcals. When we're considering carbohydrates, we also need to be wary of the glucose infusion rate, or in the case of parenteral nutrition, the dextrose infusion rate. For adult patients, that typically maxes out at 5 milligrams of glucose per kilogram of body weight per minute. And this is just to prevent things such as hyperglycemia from happening, because if we infuse the glucose too quickly, that can have negative effects on the patient. For Mr. M, or today's patient, we're using a total of 268 grams of dextrose. If we convert that into milligrams, we'll see that coming out to 268,000 milligrams of dextrose. To get our total glucose infusion rate, we can take that 268,000 milligrams, divide it by the 68.2 kilograms our patient came into us at, divide that by 24 hours in the day, and divide that by 60 minutes in the hour. This will give us a total glucose infusion rate of 2.73 milligrams per kilogram per minute. As this is well below the 5 milligram per kilogram per minute maximum, we are looking A-OK with our dextrose recommendations for this patient. As we come to look at our third macronutrient, obviously that's going to be lipids. Now, if you remember earlier, we talked about how this patient is on propofol, which is a lipid-containing formula, meaning they're not only getting calories from this, but they're getting grams of fat. So we can account for some of those grams of fat and calories into our overall lipid calculation. If we think about our propofol at 10 mils per hour times 24 hours in the day, we're going to see that total out to 240 mils of propofol per day. So for those 240 mils of propofol, each milliliter of propofol is a standard amount of 1.1 kcals per mil, which will help us calculate out the number of calories that are actually coming from the propofol, which totals out to be 264 kcals. Now, if you remember, after we provided our protein and our carbohydrate, we were left with 390 kcals, and then minus out the kcals from our propofol, that 264 kcals. That leaves us with a total of 126 kcals left to provide as lipid. When we're considering lipid that's going to be provided in parenteral nutrition, we're actually looking at a lipid solution that contains 10 kcals per gram. So when we're looking at the 126 kcals left to provide, and we divide it by 10 kcals per gram, we're going to see us needing 12.6 grams of fat from our lipid piggyback. Let's round that to 13 grams just to keep it more simple for us. That's going to be a total of 130 kcals from lipid. There are multiple different kinds of lipid solutions that you can choose to use in your parenteral nutrition, but today we're going to choose to use a 20% solution, which means that we're going to see that equal 200 grams of lipid per 1 liter of solution provided. As we know, we need 13 grams, and there's 200 grams per liter. We can use that to do a little math here to find out how much we're going to provide in terms of lipid. That 13 grams of lipid needed divided by 200 grams per liter will give us a total of 0.065 liters or 65 mils of 20% solution required for our patient today to receive that 130 kcals. Sometimes people like to do the lipids in terms of the number of kcals per milliliter of solution. So you can also do this in a way to see that 130 kcals can be divided by the 2 kcals per milliliter seen in a 20% solution. That will also lead you to the same outcome of 65 milliliters total provided that will contribute 130 kcals. One thing to note about patients who are on propofol is the fact that propofol can change. People may need more propofol one day than they need another day, and it's up to you to communicate with the care team, including nurses and doctors, to ensure that you know when the propofol is changing, how much it's changing to, and if a patient is coming off of propofol, because all of those things will impact how much we're going to provide to our patient, especially in that lipid piggyback. There are some instances in which an individual might have elevated triglycerides or some other concern that would lead them to not need as much lipid. This could mean that you might see someone withhold a lipid piggyback from a patient. This is also why it's helpful to have just a lipid piggyback separate from our custom solution so that we can withhold it if needed. While a patient may need us to withhold their lipid piggyback for a variety of reasons, it's important to note whether or not this is consistently happening to make sure that you're still providing an appropriate amount of calories and nutrients to your patient. If the lipid piggyback is withheld for a long period of time, such as more than a week, you may find it necessary to increase the protein and carbohydrate provisions to again make sure your patient is getting enough energy in all to support their healing. This patient, as with many patients receiving parenteral nutrition, will be getting a multivitamin/multi-mineral solution added into their custom 2-in-1 bag. This is important to, of course, make sure that they get all of their micronutrients and to make sure that we don't see any deficiency starting based on the fact that they're not able to currently eat orally right now. As we did note with this patient, there were no previous micronutrient deficiencies or concerns, so there's no need for us to make any large changes in that arena. Also falling in the category of micronutrients is electrolytes. Some institutions have dietitians manage the electrolytes, and other institutions might have different healthcare providers, such as a pharmacist, manage the electrolytes. While this is the case for some institutions to have the dietitian look at all the lab values in the morning and make plans for the patient's next day electrolytes, this isn't always the case. So we're not going to use any electrolyte calculations for this particular patient. But if you are interested in more videos on electrolytes, please let us know in the comments box below so we know what to start working on next. Fluids are another instance in which the dietitian might be managing, but it might also be managed by another individual or group of individuals in the care team. It's quite common to see fluid managed by the ICU team for individuals who are in the ICU. This could be easiest for the ICU team to manage due to large amounts of fluid resuscitation that could be happening, as well as the likelihood of this patient to be on some other kind of IV fluids. This could be something like saline or lactated ringers, or could be a medication that is suspended in fluid. If they're changing very often, it's oftentimes easier for the ICU team to manage than the dietitian in terms of fluid status. Should you be a dietitian that's managing fluids, you'll need to consider things such as baseline needs, any kinds of wounds or ostomies, or even drain output, any kinds of fluid restrictions, all of the IV fluids given to the patient, as well as overall status. Again, if you're interested in hearing more about fluid recommendations and how a dietitian might manage this, please let us know in the comments below so we can put that into our upcoming videos. So while at this point we can provide total numbers of grams of all of our macronutrients we'd be providing to our individual, including the 100 grams of protein, the 268 grams of carb, and the 13 grams of lipid in addition to propofol that we're providing, you may see that some institutions prefer to get their recommendations for parenteral nutrition in terms of milliliters of a specific solution, which means we need to do a few more steps to get to our final answer. I'm going to change colors real quickly here and clear up part of our screen to allow us to finish these calculations. So let's jump back to our first macronutrient, protein. If we think about how we have a custom 2-in-1 solution, you'll remember that we have a little bit more flexibility on exactly what we'd like to put into our solution, which means that we have the opportunity to choose what kind of amino acid solution we'd like to provide to this individual. Amino acid solutions come in a range of percentages, meaning the percent of amino acids that are provided in the solution. While you can provide higher percentages of amino acids in your solution, that would make it very highly concentrated and is not necessarily appropriate to give to all of our patients, just to give that high concentration in a low volume. So you might see patients getting anywhere from a 10, a 20, maybe up into the 30% amino acid solutions. For today's calculation, the amino acid solution that I've chosen to work with is a 10% amino acid solution. What this means is that 10% of the solution is made up of amino acids, which will give us a total of 100 grams of protein in the form of amino acids per 1 liter of solution. If you remember, I made this pretty easy for us. We needed 100 grams of protein to provide to this individual in 1 day span. And with a 10% solution providing 100 grams of protein in 1 liter, we can easily say that we can provide that 100 grams of protein in 1 liter of 10% amino acid solution. Moving over to carbohydrate, we're looking at this 268 grams of carbohydrate provided per day to this individual. For our dextrose solution today, I chose to work with a 25% dextrose solution, which is going to give us 250 grams of dextrose per 1 liter. You'll notice in both the scenarios of protein and carbohydrate solution, we merely moved the decimal place over 1 spot and added a 0 to get the total number of grams of dextrose, which would mean we could do that for pretty much any solution. So for our little offshoot example here, if I wanted, say, a 22% dextrose solution, I would know that 1 liter of that would give me 220 grams of dextrose per liter. That's just a quick and easy way to know how many grams of dextrose you'll be providing if you give 1 liter of solution to your patient. But let's get back to this patient and where we're talking about our 25% dextrose solution and the 250 grams of dextrose provided in each liter. If we're looking again at our 268 grams needed, we're seeing 268 grams of carb, and we can divide that by the 250 grams of carb in each liter of our 25% solution. This is going to give us a total output of 1.072 liters of solution that we'll need of that 25% dextrose solution. So now that we've gotten our 1 liter of 10% amino acid solution and our 1.072 liters of 25% dextrose solution, we can pop down to our third and final macronutrient, the lipids. Now we did a little of this work ahead of time with lipids, seeing that we converted our 130 kcals, divided that by 2 kcals per mil, and got us actually our volume total here with 65 mils of the intravenous lipid emulsions that we're providing in the 20%. So if we wanted to do this only in volume form for a lipid, we could say we need 65 milliliters of the 20% lipid emulsions. All right, so I cleared up the screen a little bit here so that we could consolidate all of our recommendations to allow you to see it in both the volume form and the gram form and to see what kcals we got from this experience. Summarized in total here, we saw that our protein in the form of amino acids gave us 1 liter of 10% amino acids, 100 grams of protein, and 400 kcals. Looking at carbohydrates in the form of dextrose, we had 1.072 liters of 25% dextrose, giving us 268 grams of dextrose and 911 calories. In terms of lipid, and that's meant as the lipid piggyback, that was 65 milliliters of a 20% lipid solution, providing 13 grams of lipid and 130 kcals. Finally, because this person is currently sedated with propofol, we saw 240 mils of that per day, providing 24 grams of lipid and 264 kcals. This totals us out at 1,705 kcals, which means that we have met somewhere within our energy need goals of 1,700 to 1,800 kcals. So overall, we did a pretty good job making this custom 2-in-1 for our patient. We saw our fluids were going to be managed per ICU and potentially per RD. So if you are the one managing it, make sure to go back and look at some of the considerations that you may need to account for in terms of fluid. And we also saw that our patient is going to get their micronutrients through a multivitamin and multimineral solution added into their custom 2-in-1 bag. And we also may see that the electrolytes could be managed per RD, which means you might need to be considering all of the lab values that we see, as well as how we're going to provide and replete electrolytes if needed for particular patients. That could also be managed per the pharmacy or another person on the healthcare team. So just make sure that you know what your institution will be handling and what you are most comfortable with as well. I hope this has been a helpful introduction to custom 2-in-1 parenteral nutrition bags plus a lipid piggyback. If you have any interest in further parenteral nutrition videos, please let us know in the comments box below or by liking this video so we know what kind of content to make for you in the future. Thanks for joining us here at Dietitians and Nutrition Support, and we look forward to seeing you next time.